we will look the position of Doras and Peasants in Hyderabad state. Hyderabad state was ruled by the Nizam. The last Nizam was Mir Usman Ali Khan. So in Hyderabad state, under the Nizam rule, there were many subordinate chieftaincies. What do you mean by chieftaincies? Some leaders who were locally dominant. The chieftaincies, in the sense, leaders in a locality who were dominant in their locality. So these chieftaincies were called in Nizam state as Jagirdars, Samstanamdars, Inamdars. So these Jagirdars, Samstanamdars, and Inamdars, these were the chiefs of their locality who ruled their locality independently under Nizam's control. So these Jagirdars, Samstanamdars, and Inamdars, they have collected land revenue from the lands under their control. There were many villages under their control. So they collected revenue, land revenue from the lands which were under their control. And from the land revenue collected, some share they supplied to the Nizam. Because these Jagirdars, Samstanamdars, and Inamdars were under the Nizam control. So they supplied, these Jagirdars supplied some small amount of revenue to the Nizam, and that was called Peshkash. What was called? Peshkash. What is Peshkash? It is the tax, that is land revenue, Jamindars, that means Jagirdars, Samstanamdars, Inamdars. They collected land revenue. So from that land revenue, some part they supplied to the Nizam. That was called Peshkash. So Peshkash is a small amount of land revenue supplied to the Nizam by Jagirdars. And remaining land revenue Jagirdars enjoyed. These Jagirdars were also responsible for the administration of their areas. In Hyderabad state, that there were 1500 Jagirs. That means landlords. How many? 1500 Jagirs. We call them owners of the lands. And these 1500 Jagirs, they spread in 6535 villages. And near about 1400 villages were under the direct control of Nizam. The Nizam too had his personal land. His personal land consists of 400 villages, and that was called Sarfikas. Sarfikas. Sarfikas refers to the personal land of the Nizam, which consisted of 1400 villages. Let us see that how the village were controlled and how was the administration in a Hyderabad state. Okay, Nizam was the ruler of Hyderabad state who was ruling the Hyderabad state by following the British policies. Hyderabad state was under the British and this was ruled by the Nizams. Hyderabad state ruler was Nizam. Nizam followed the British policies. In the first half of 19th century, there Nizam tried to collect maximum land revenue using the Deshmukhs. Deshmukhs were the local leaders. So Deshmukhs were used by Nizam to collect high land revenue. Peasants who were cultivating the land, they were not able to pay the land revenue which was high collected by the Deshmukhs. So in the first half of the 19th century, due to the high or maximum land revenue collected by the Deshmukhs, resulted that peasants have vacated the lands. Peasants stopped cultivation under a high land revenue system. So there was completely downfall in agriculture. Agriculture was collapsed due to the maximum land revenue collected by the Nizam through the Deshmukhs. So the Nizam government wanted to revise the land revenue system. So by this situation, Nizam government had set up a new land revenue system where some district officers were appointed by the government and they collect land revenue directly. The Nizam government appointed district officials to collect the land revenue directly. And here Deshmukhs, Jagirdars were removed. Samsthanamdars, Inamdars, all these were removed from collecting the land revenue. So the landlords who earlier collected land revenue, they were thrown out of collecting the land revenue. So to compensate them, the Nizam government paid for every year certain amount for to the Jagirdars. That means Jagirdars have lost the right to collect land revenue because Nizam government appointed some district officials who were given right to collect land revenue directly, which was earlier collected by landlords. So landlords have lost their rights to collect land revenue. So to compensate such a right which landlords lost, there the Nizam government paid certain amount every year that was called rusum. Rusum is the annual amount paid to the landlords by the Nizam government to compensate for losing the right of collecting land revenue. And they were given these landlords, what we call Jagirdars, Samsthanamdars, inamdars, they were given patta rights, which gives full ownership rights over the land and wastelands and also forests. So here Jagidars were given rusum, which is the payment made to the Jagirdars per annum by Nizam government. In addition to that, Jagirdars also got ownership rights on the lands which were under their control, and they were given ownership rights on the wastelands which were adjusting adjoining to their lands, and forest land which is in their villages, that also assigned to the Jagirdars. Understand? So Nizam have removed these Jagirdars from collecting the land revenue and appointed some officials for collecting the land revenue. And these Jagirdars were given ownership rights by giving a patta, a document. We call it a document, a land document. Understand? So patta rights were given to the Jagirdars on the lands of them, along with the wastelands and forest lands which were under their control. So in this way, Jagirdars turned to owners of many thousands of acres of land by the patta, that is agreement given, a land paper given to the Jagirdars by the what to call Nizam's government. Understand? At that time, there was a great demand in the market for several products. There was a large export market for several products from India, that is castor, amudalu, groundnut. These were highly demanded in a export market. So these Jagirdars realized that if they cultivate and produce this castor and groundnut, there would be profit to Jagirdars. So Jagirdars, who were the owners of vast lands and also wastelands, they brought more wasteland which is under their control for cultivation. And who are going to cultivate? Right? They did not cultivate. Okay, they expanded the scope of vetti, that is slave system. In Nizam's rule under Jagirdars, there was a slave system. Vetti system was there, vetti chakri. So these Jagirdars, they expanded the slave system. What is by slave system? Where peasants, village artisans, and some lower caste people were forced to work for Jagirdars, Samsthanamdars, and Inamdars. For that work, there was no any payment, and that what we call unpaid labor. Unpaid labor, also called vetti. It means working without any wages. So peasants, then village artisans, and some service caste. That means Dalits. They had worked for landlords. They given work free of wages for landlords. And there were large landlords in Nizam state. They were called Doras. Jagirdars are smaller than the Doras. Doras were owners of large landlots. These Doras lived in a large forts which were called Gadi. Understand? And these Doras also maintain retinue of servants. What in by retinue? Retinue in the sense group of servants and army. Doras had their own army and own servants, and they lived in a large forts which were called gadis. Understand? There were forts in Nizam state. Golconda fort is there. Uh, we find several forts in Mahbubnagar district, in Adilabad, in Nizamabad, even in Telangana, Elegandala fort. So like this, forts were maintained by the Dorras, and they maintained a group of servants and a group of soldiers. Retinue means a group. What we call? Here, retinue means a group. There were several servants who served to the Dorras free of wages. That what we call vetti. Even the soldiers also worked for them. Okay. And these Dorras also cultivated their thousands of acres land by giving land on rent to the tenants. That means their these Dorras, they had got their lands cultivated by tenant cultivators and cultivated by forced labor. That means Dorras had the land cultivated in two methods. One is land cultivated by tenants. That means their land, Dorras given their land on rent to the peasants. And such peasants are called here tenant cultivators. And some other part of the land of the Dorras cultivated by free servants, that is what you call forced labor. Understand? So these Dorras, they did not work, really they did not cultivate. Understand? They made lower caste people and village artisans, that is carpenters, ironsmith, like this different kinds of basket weavers, like these different village artisans we find. So all these were forced by the Dorras to work for landlords, to work for Dorras. Understand? So these Dorras were very powerful in their locality. Understand? So these Dorras also acted like money lenders. They had given money, lending money. That means they were the financials, what you call supply of finance to the people who need of money. Okay. So Dorras, they acted as money lenders. They got their lands cultivated by the forced labor and tenants. Okay. As they were powerful in their locality, they also acted like judges. Okay. They had judicial powers also. When there were disputes and conflicts in the village, those disputes were settled by the Dorras. Dorras also given judgment on what you call the disputes which were occurred, which were there among the village people. Whenever they have gone for giving the judgment, they have paid partition manner. That means whenever they were giving the judgment, they acted what to call partial. That means they given judgment benefiting to the upper caste people. The disputes were settled in the villages. While settling the disputes in the villages, they given judgment in favor of upper caste people. So Doras were very strong and very cruel, right? They were not paying anything to the forced labor. Forced labor working free of wages. And tenant farmers who were cultivating land on rent, they also did not get anything because the land rent was very high. Land rent was very high. Okay. And here under Doras, there were small landlords. They were called Patwaris. Do you know Patwaris? Who were the leaders of a small area. These Patwaris and small landlords also followed the orders of the Doras. And these Doras had kept some rules which have to be followed by the lower caste laborers. Okay, that means they they kept rules like this. What you know? Lower caste persons were not allowed to wear shirts. They were not allowed to wear shirts. Even to slippers, footwear, they have to move without chappal, without shirt, and without cap. That what you call turban. So chappal, shirt, turban is the symbol of a status for Doras. Doras worn a turban on their head. So if lower caste people would have gone wearing this, that becomes equal to the Doras. So Doras wanted to show that lower caste people were not equal to them. And they kept a rule that whenever these lower caste people come across Doras, they always bend before Doras. And they should call the Doras with a what to call word Dora. That's all. Dora Banjan. Like that, they used to go on addressing to these landlords. They did not look into the eyes of Doras. Understand? Always the lower caste people were forced to look down that to the feet of the Doras. Understand? And they were forced. Lower caste people were forced to bend always in front of Doras. అంటే ఎప్పుడు కూడా వంగి ఉండాలి Doras ముంగట. Understand? So this was what you call a situation in Hyderabad state under Doras. During that period, in erstwhile Mahbubnagar district and Nalgonda district, there were 550 Doras. How much you know? 550 Doras were there who had thousands of acres of land under their control. You think that? Imagine that thousands of acres means you just think that how much vast lands were there under their control and how much they were rich. Okay, and some of the Doras also had some lakhs of acres. For example, Vishnuri Ramachandra Reddy, Janna Reddy, Pratap Reddy, Vishnuri Ramachandra Reddy. These were the examples for Doras who had ownership rights on some lakhs of acres of land. So can anybody would go against these Doras who are owners of some lakhs of lands? So that was the system of land revenue in Nizam state. Understand? So these 550 Doras, they were the owners of vast acres of land. They supplied some small amount of land revenue collected to the Nizam, that was called Peshkas, right? Nizam also maintained his own land, that was 1400 villages, and that was called Sarfikas. What is that? Sarfikas. In this way, we see that peasants have suffered a lot, what to call here, understand? And during this period, there were a lot of famines also, understand? There many famines occurred in Nizam state too, understand? There was a shortage of food, famines, and there was a massive food shortages, and that led to what to call fighting for the uh, what you call food regular supply of food. There were regular features of the British rule. There were high taxes and rents. Though famines were there, Britishers collected high taxes and rents, and there were very little reserves the peasants had. The peasants have faced a lot of difficulty, seasons or crop failures. When the crops failed, at that time also peasants were forced to pay and forced to export what to call food grains. British were engaged in the war, so they exported what you call that they imported large quantity of food grains from our country. Food grains were exported out of our country in large quantities. So when food cultivated in India was exported to other countries, that led to creating shortage of food in India. So this led to scarcity of food in India. Understand? And in addition to this, the government also refused to interfere in the what you call powerful traders who also created a artificial shortage by what you call blocking the food grains. There the traders also, to get high price for the food grains, they blocked the food grains. So here the government did not interfere into the matter of the powerful traders who created what you call shortage of shortage of food grains artificially. Understand? Here in Andhra Pradesh, we see that in Andhra, like the rest of the country, there they suffered for severe famines. In the 19th and 20th century, there were severe famines occurred throughout the India. Understand? During the famine time also, Britishers have collected the tax and the land revenue. And one severe famine occurred in India at Ganjam, that was called Ganjam famine. What that? Ganjam famine